I read 22 books in April and May with an average rating of 3.22 stars, and I have a lot of thoughts and feelings, so I think we should probably jump into this wrap up. I will say before we get into it that I have been trying to use this symbol and sound effect to indicate when I read a book for a reading vlog so that you know you can check the description box for the link so you can get a much longer, more in-depth review of whatever book it is, so that this video is not a million years long, and also so that I don't spend a huge amount of time repeating myself. The description box will be organized for you with all of those links so that you can easily find those videos if you're interested in a much more thorough review. Now, April and May were not necessarily much busier reading months than usual, but they were very, very busy for me in my personal life, and I just found myself pulled in so many different directions and kind of stressed out and chaotic, to be honest. And my energy levels were really being affected. I have been so tired the last couple weeks, but something that I cannot and will not let slip, no matter how tired I get, is my dental hygiene, because I have had some traumatic experiences in my life with my teeth, and I have had to spend an unnecessary amount of time in the dentist chair because of my poor genetics when it comes to my teeth. And so I have committed to myself for years that no matter what, I will do my best to care for my teeth, to give myself the best chance to spend less time in the dentist chair moving forward. And one of the only ways I was able to do that in the last 2 months was thanks to this video's sponsor, Suri. Honestly, I don't know how I would have gone through this without Suri. Suri's electric toothbrush has a sleek sonic design and a really intentional minimalist aesthetic. They also come with replaceable plant-based brush heads and a free recycling program, which I really appreciate as someone who cares about my impact on the environment and a vegan of many, many years. Suri has multiple beautiful colors to choose from, but I decided to go with Winter Fern because I love green, and it goes with my house, which is green, green, green everywhere, as it should be. Suri provides a powerful yet gentle dentist-approved clean and a 1+ month battery life to reduce the charging clutter on your sink. And again, if you're as busy and as worn out as I've been the last couple months, you will not remember to charge your toothbrush every night, and you shouldn't have to. Your toothbrush should be able to last more than one brushing session. Or in Suri's case, over a month. I also love the UVC travel cleaning case. I like to store my toothbrush in here and run a cycle to make sure it's nice and clean every time I want to use it. It also comes with a magnetic mirror mount if you want to be able to get your toothbrush up off your counter to reduce clutter and stress. I love that my Suri toothbrush has a pressure sensor to let me know when I'm brushing too hard, because I do tend to get a little vigorous, feeling like if I brush harder, I am brushing better, which is just not the case, as my dental hygienist constantly reminds me. You can sign up to their subscription for the plant-based replaceable heads so you can get them delivered to your door, and it's another thing you don't have to check off the list. They will just come when you need them. If you're looking for a better alternative to your current toothbrush situation, I highly recommend checking out Suri. Click the link in my description box or scan the QR code on screen and use my code PLANT15 for an extra 15% off Suri. I know you'll see why I love them so much. Starting with April, I finished 9 books in April with an average rating of 3.22 stars for the month. The first book I finished, as per usual, was our book club pick for the previous month, which was a reread for me of a childhood favorite, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. What can I say about The Hobbit that has not already been said? This is one of my favorite childhood books. I had the 1960s edition BBC dramatization, abridged version of The Hobbit that I had on tape as a kid that I listened to probably several hundred times. I literally could quote the entire thing as a child, and I still can quote multiple parts. I can recreate the line reads of the actors because I listened to it so many times. And I also read the full version a handful of times as a kid. Now, as an adult, I have not reread The Hobbit in years, and I was very excited when my book club decided to read a childhood favorite, and my nomination of The Hobbit won. It is not often that my nomination wins, so when it does win, I get very excited, and I was so excited to read The Hobbit again, and it did not disappoint. It's a 5-star read. If you haven't read The Hobbit, what are you doing? It's so delightful. If you love fantasy, if you love epic fantasy, if you love fantasy with a bit of a cozy found family vibe, that is The Hobbit. If you don't know anything about The Hobbit follows Bilbo Baggins, who is a hobbit, and he's reluctantly, very reluctantly swept up into an adventure that he had not planned for and does not have the experience to deal with, and has to go on this very harrowing set of adventures with a group of dwarves and one wizard, in an attempt to defeat a great and terrible dragon. And it's fantastic. It's lovely. It's wonderful. I adore it with my whole heart. I think it's really a beautiful book, and I think you should read it. The world building is really fun and fantastic, and the characters just jump off the page, and it really really pulls you in, and there are some surprisingly emotionally poignant moments as well. I just think it's amazing, and I love it so much. So 5 stars for The Hobbit. I was very excited to reread it and to discuss it with my book club, and also to extol the virtues of the BBC dramatization from the 60s if you can get your hands on it. I know Libro FM has a version. I was able to get it to re-listen to it, which was just a delight. So if you're looking for something fun, especially for your kids, if you have kids or young siblings or cousins or nibblings or something, it's so much fun. Anyways, I love The Hobbit. That was my first read of April. Next up, I read Brimstone by Callie Hart. And this had a dedicated reading vlog, so I'm going to keep this ever so brief. The only reason I picked this up is because I was in a bit of a reading slump after some of the incredible books I read at the end of March. Yes, March. And I just needed something to break me out of that. And I remembered my experience with Quicksilver, which was kind of excruciating, but also very entertaining. So I thought I would do it again with Brimstone. And honestly, it worked pretty well. So check out that reading vlog for more details. But Brimstone is the sequel in a longer series. I don't know if it's been determined how many books it's going to be, but it's a romantasy, and it's a young woman who is sort of dragged into a different world she didn't know existed, and faced with fae and vampires and all kinds of things that she didn't know existed. And she meets her mate, talks about it a lot, and it's quite the experience. I didn't personally love Brimstone myself. You know, I didn't go into this expecting to like it. I went into it with the hope that it would be entertaining and it would break me out of my slump. And that, it was effective for that, but I also didn't like it, which I kind of expected. Again, I don't normally read books that I expect not to like unless I have to for a particular challenge or something. This was a bit of an outlier. I just really needed something to pull me out of my sort of morose moping around, wishing I was still reading about the characters I loved from the books that I'd recently read, and not being able to reread them immediately, and not really wanting to read anything else. So I thought if I just purposefully read something I knew I probably wasn't going to like, that I would just rip the Band-Aid off. Then I could just get back to my regularly scheduled programming, which honestly is what happened. So it worked out for me. But yeah, I would say that it was worse than Quicksilver on many levels, especially the writing, which was excruciating, and I gave it 1 star. Go watch the reading vlog for way more context. I talked for a very long time. Okay, then I read Palace of the Peacock by Wilson Harris for my Reading Around the World challenge. I ended up really loving this. It was a very odd, non-linear kind of book about a group of men going on a mission down a river in a boat, and things become increasingly surreal and strange. And it is just such an interesting, odd, beautiful book that I really enjoyed spending time with, and I would highly recommend. I gave it 5 stars. But that is all I will say. You can check out the reading blog for more. Then I read Wizard of the Crow by Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o, and this was our buddy read choice for the first quarter of the year. And this is a Kenyan author, so I also was able to count this towards my Reading Around the World challenge for Kenya. And I adored this. This was so absurd. This is a political satire, literary fantasy, and it's set in this fictional African country, a dictatorship, where the titular Wizard of the Crow gets embroiled in a bit of a revolution, some resistance movements. There is so much absurdity. It is very satirical. It's very odd and strange and silly and humorous, but it also has a lot to say and a lot of heart, and it's quite long also and pretty dense, but I just loved it. I didn't really know what to expect going into it. I read the blurb and thought, okay, sure, I'm up for that. And then as I got into it, I was just thinking, wow, this is really out there. And wow, has so many layers, and this is so fascinating. And I was just completely drawn in by it. I thought it was so much fun. I thought it was so interesting. I thought the characters were really fascinating. And I just had a blast, honestly, reading it. It was really quite something, and I felt a little giddy upon finishing it. I kind of feel a little giddy now talking about it, and I definitely definitely am going to be reading much more from this author. I actually went out and bought several more of his works because of how much I enjoyed Wizard of the Crow. It was a 5-star read for me. I thought it was amazing. Whether you're doing a Reading Around the World challenge and need a pick from Kenya, or if you're just trying to diversify your reading more, or you're interested in political satire in your literature, I would highly, highly recommend this. It was such a great read. Honestly, even though it is quite dense and it's very long, I think it's also quite accessible and just a fun time. So I would highly recommend Wizard of the Crow. Next up, my wheel that I used for my Read It or Unhaul It challenge played a little prank on me because I asked for something a little lighter and easier to get through, and it landed on The Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, which I took as a personal affront, to be totally honest. I had a lot to say about this, and honestly, I want to keep it pretty brief here. Basically, as much as I loved the core premise here and the sections of the novel that were dealing with the core premise, which was following life in a monastery, the building of a cathedral, and getting into the nitty-gritty nerdiness of the architectural feat that is building a cathedral of this kind, especially in the Middle Ages, and life at the time, and the characterization was quite good for many of the characters. It was very easy to read and accessible and engaging. I found that this diverged too often from those parts and got distracted in trying to describe other things that I wasn't as interested in. And my absolute biggest issue was how women were written here and how they were handled, and how much the just sheer amount of sexual assault on the page that was explicit and the way it was framed. And again, I don't want to get into the weeds because it will take me a long time to explain it, and I've already explained it in a video, so I will just say, for me, despite really loving the cathedral building and the life in the monastery and life in the Middle Ages aspects of this, and enjoying many of the characters, my experience was kind of ruined by feeling like this book did not care about how women would feel reading it one iota, and that really sucked. So I gave this 2 stars. Go check out the full review for much more context about why I felt that way and more detail. But I was just very disappointed that the aspects I loved about this book were ruined by things that did not have to be there, literally at all. There was no reason. There was no reason. I'm still annoyed. Anyway, next up I have 2 books from the same author that I read for a reading vlog focused on this author's work, trying her for the first time, Cleopatra and Faebound, both by Saara El-Arifi. So check out that reading vlog for much more detail in my thoughts, but I will start with Cleopatra. This is historical fiction, a retelling of Cleopatra's life. I really, really enjoyed this. There are maybe a couple aspects I could get nitpicky about, a few critiques. Again, in my reading vlog, I get into more detail into the things that sort of jumped out at me, but overall, I really liked this. I found it very readable. I found it very compelling. I thought Cleopatra herself was a really interesting character. And while I know that this was meant to be more a portrait of her as a person and her personal life and less about being the ruler of Egypt. So I understand that was intentional. I just personally would have loved a little bit more of her as a ruler. It felt a little bit odd to almost completely exclude that part of her life when it was such a huge part of her existence and experience. And I thought the ending was odd, which I can't really speak on without spoilers, so I won't. But for me, the ending, I wasn't sure that I felt it really added anything to what the book was doing, and I kind of felt like it took away from some of the themes. So again, check out the reading vlog for more detail. For me, this was really, really great overall, and I had a really good time with it, even though I had some qualms here and there, and I gave Cleopatra 4 stars. Then I picked up Faebound by the same author, Saara El-Arifi, and this is fantasy, sometimes described as romantasy. I would say that it's probably more accurately described as fantasy romance, because there are 2 romances. We're following 2 sisters, and they both have a romance subplot. I would just say that the romances, while they are pretty prominent, are not actually the main through line of the story. It definitely is more focused on that plot outside of that, so I'm not sure romantasy is totally accurate, but your mileage may vary. Your definition of romantasy might be different than mine. One of the 2 couples is sapphic, which is nice. And the basic premise here is that one of 2 elven sisters is exiled from her homeland, and her sister follows her into exile, and they discover some things that were being kept secret from them, some aspects of their world that weren't quite what they thought, and they come in contact with Fae for the first time, and political intrigue ensues, and magic, and love, and cute little animal sidekicks, and all kinds of things. And I feel like this had a lot of potential, but I'm not sure the execution quite landed for me. I definitely didn't hate the book. I enjoyed it well enough while I was reading it. I just felt like there were a number of threads that were left untied, and there were some very obvious things that were treated like big, shocking reveals that felt like we were basically just told that already, that I felt like I was missing something, that it was meant to be a surprise or a twist. I felt like the relationships were really rushed and underdeveloped, which felt odd. It felt like we skipped several stages of their relationships, which is, again, part of why I would hesitate to call this romantasy, because it really doesn't feel like the romances get center stage. And some of the characterization felt a little uneven to me, or inconsistent, I should say. Again, I didn't hate this whatsoever. It just didn't live up to my expectations, unfortunately. Anyway, I go into way more detail in the reading vlog, obviously, but I gave Faebound 3 stars. Then I read Cursebound by Saara El-Arifi, which is the second book in the series after Faebound. This was not included in my reading vlog, but once I finished my reading vlog, I became curious about what would happen next. So I got the audiobook from my library and I listened to it over the next couple days, and unfortunately, I didn't feel like it was an improvement upon Faebound. I don't think it was a big drop-off in quality either. I just think a lot of the issues that I had with the first book continued in the second book in a pretty consistent manner. I think the writing continued to feel a little bit more YA than I had expected. I think the characterization continued to be a little bit inconsistent. The relationships, again, felt like they didn't really have the buildup or the development I was hoping for. I will say that there is a new couple introduced in the second book that is a gay pairing, and one of them is trans, and I honestly loved this coupling, but something that it pointed out to me was that I loved this couple so much that it totally eclipsed my interest in the original 2 couples. And it felt like that was probably a failing of the series, at least for me as a reader, that the 2 couples that I've been following since the first book, I actually no longer cared at all about. And I only wanted to read about this new couple that didn't even become a couple until maybe the last third of the book, or at least in the second half. It just felt like it reinforced to me how poorly developed those original 2 couples were. And there were some things in the second book that, again, felt a little bit rushed or a little underdeveloped, a couple plot holes here and there. It was fine. It was fine. I didn't hate it whatsoever. I was kind of hoping it would fix some of the things that bugged me about the first book and just continue onwards and upwards. And I felt like it mostly just recreated the same issues I had with book 1, which maybe I shouldn't be shocked by. So anyway, that was Cursebound. I gave it 3 stars again. And the last book I read in April was Innamorata by Ava Reid, and I read this in a reading vlog all on its lonesome, so there was an entirely dedicated video just for this book. And this is a dark, gothic fantasy. Some people are describing it as horror, depending on where you look. Gothic horror, dark fantasy. And the basic premise is that our protagonist is living on this island that used to practice necromancy. Her family used to practice necromancy. She's part of the House of Teeth. And their grandmother, the matriarch of their family, dies. And then her cousin, who becomes the new head of their house, is betrothed to the prince. They travel to the castle for the wedding, and she falls in love with the last person she should fall in love with. And it's a bit of forbidden love, and there's a lot of body horror and, death. And I didn't like this. I don't want to let myself go on a rant, because again, I have an entire video talking about this book. I thought that I was going to love this. I read so much horror. I read so much fantasy. In what world would I not love a blending of fantasy and horror? And I had not read any Ava Reid yet, but I was intrigued. I'd heard about multiple of her books and they sounded like they would maybe be up my alley. I picked this up because of the controversy around there not being any content warnings and people being really upset at that based on the kind of content that's in the book, which is something I address in my video as I go along. But not only do I, yes, 100% think this book should have had content warnings, I also just didn't like it. Unfortunately, it was not for me. I found the writing not to be my taste. I did not like the way that the story was told. It felt incredibly repetitive. I felt it almost didn't go anywhere for most of the book. It was spinning its wheels. I didn't really know what the point was for most of the book. I found the few moments that were the biggest, shocking, most gory, graphic moments were completely out of place and did not add anything, and definitely should have had content warnings, even though they felt completely removed from the rest of the plot to me. And my biggest issue with it is that it is incredibly fatphobic. It might be the most fatphobic book I have possibly ever read. And I found that really upsetting. And honestly, as I said in my reading vlog, I would have DNF'd it very early on because of the fat phobia if I hadn't been trying to get a feel for the content so I could make a video talking about whether it should have had content warnings. If I hadn't been making a video about it and already put effort into the video, I would not have finished this book. And I personally would not recommend it to anyone. So on that positive note, that was the last book I read in April. Oh yeah, I gave Innamorata 1 star. So those are all the books I read in April. Now we're getting into May. Things go up from here. Thank goodness. In May, I finished 13 books, and my average rating was, what was my average rating? 3.77 stars. So I read 4 more books than in April, but my average rating went up by half a star, which is pretty awesome, honestly. The first book I finished in May was our April book club pick, which was The River Has Roots by Amal El-Mohtar, and I loved Amal's previous book in collaboration with Max Gladstone. Is that who it was? This Is How You Lose the Time War. It's up on my shelves, up there on my sci-fi shelf. A favorite, a 5-star read. And I was so excited to read this one. I kept putting it off because I wanted to really focus on it, even though it's so short. It's such a tiny little book, but I wanted to be able to take my time with it. And then my book club voted to read it in April. So I finally had my reason to sit down and read it, and I loved it. It is a fairy tale, and the story follows 2 sisters who are of a family who take care of these magical willow trees along a river. And the sisters have these beautiful singing voices. They sing together. They sing to the trees each morning. Then something happens and one of the sisters is pulled into the world of fairy, and I won't say anything else because I don't want to spoil it. I thought this was beautiful. It's beautifully written. It very much feels like it's written like a flowing river. I just love this so much. It was magical. It was beautiful. I adored the sisters' relationship. I cried reading this. I thought their sisterly bond was just gorgeous. I loved the writing. It was very poetic, a flowing river, very tumbling, and a lot of momentum to the prose. And I just felt like the story was really lovely. And even though it's short, it is effective and it leaves you wanting more in the best possible way. And I just thought it was so wonderful. And I give it 5 stars. I would highly recommend. The next book I finished in May was Yesteryear by Caro Claire Burke. This book is everywhere. It was everywhere. It is everywhere. I picked it up because I kept hearing about it literally everywhere all the time. And this book is a satire. It is a some people are describing it as literary fiction. I've seen some people describe it almost as like a thriller. I think I would lean more into lit fic satire as my definition for it. But in this book, we're following Natalie, who grew up in a more religious, traditional family, and she ends up getting married out of college. She doesn't graduate from Harvard. She gets married and gets pregnant, and she ends up becoming a trad wife influencer, sharing her life on the farm with her husband and kids online. And this is another book that has a dedicated reading vlog. So one entire long detailed video about just this book if you are interested in such a thing. And this book is really a satire of the trad wife influencer. It is a commentary on traditional gender roles and how traditional, very strict, rigid, traditional gender essentialist sort of roles can be harmful to everyone in different ways. And we follow Natalie as she is sort of crumbling under the weight of the expectations that others have of her, but also her own expectations. The book examines the hypocrisy of her lifestyle as a trad wife influencer who maybe isn't as traditional as she seems online. And this book is very much sold as trad wife influencer is sent back in time to live like a real trad wife, and how is she going to handle it? That it's not necessarily inaccurate, but I do see a lot of people bouncing off this book and feeling disappointed in the book because they had a different expectation of what that would look like than what the book is actually doing. I think if you go into this book knowing that it is meant to be a deep character study of a very complicated, messy woman at the forefront, and also an examination of the hypocrisy of trad wife influencers and sort of diving into that world and really leaning heavily into the satire, then I think you will have a better time than if you go into it focused on the spectacle of the speculative fiction, for lack of a better word. It's hard to explain, especially without spoilers, but I have been honestly really surprised by the very polarizing reactions to this book, not just in the comments on my video, but also just around the internet in general, I would love to remind people that this is a debut author. Some people are being really harsh on this book. I feel kind of bad for the author, to be honest. I don't think it was a perfect book. And again, in that video, I get into detail in the things that I thought were maybe a bit clunky or things that I didn't think worked quite as well, or maybe some of the issues I had with the pacing. But overall, I thought it was really engaging and fascinating. It made me think a lot. It caused me to reflect on a lot of things. I felt so many complicated feelings about Natalie because she really sucks. She's a very unlikable character, but I also had so much deep empathy for her. And I think the author intentionally is trying to make the reader feel empathy for her despite how terrible she is. And I think it works, or at least it worked on me. I think it's just a very interesting book, and I think it's very impressive for a debut novel. So it might not be exactly what a lot of people wanted out of it. And it also wasn't necessarily what I totally expected going into it, but I was able to pivot once I realized that it wasn't exactly what I thought it was going to be, and I was able to appreciate it for what it was for the most part. So for me, Yesteryear was a 4-star read, and I thought it was very much worth the time to read it. And I think that the fact that it is causing such huge reactions and so much discussion all around the internet means that it did do something right. I think if it was as one note or simplistic as a lot of people are claiming, it would just not be causing this much discussion. Personally, I could be wrong. You could disagree. I just think that maybe there is more complexity there and there are more layers there than people are really acknowledging. And the evidence of that is the huge feelings people are having about it and how many conversations I'm seeing getting into nitty-gritty details of the plot and the themes and the characterization. There's something to be said for a book that makes people feel really strong feelings one way or the other. Even if you end up being one of those people who kind of bounce off it and are not a fan, I think it's causing people to have really interesting conversations, and I appreciate that. So anyway, check out the reading vlog for way more detail, but that was Yesteryear. Next, I read a sci-fi novel by Tarday Thompson called Rosewater, and this was such a weird book. I won't say that it was too weird for me because I'm not sure that the too weird for me is a thing that exists. I will say, though, that I struggled somewhat to grasp. I was listening to this on audiobook because it was just a personal pick, a pick that I had wanted to read for myself, not for any particular video. I had read some of this author's work in the past, some horror that I really, really, really loved. I saw this book pop up somewhere and I got so excited to read more of this author's work and was really curious how he would handle sci-fi. And I got it as an audiobook so I could just listen to it between other reading projects when I got the time. And I think I'm going to have to reread this with my eyeballs or probably do a tandem read, a simultaneous read, which is the best way for me to really pick up on all the details, listen and read at the same time. Because this is a very complicated, very confusing at times, very strange sci-fi novel. And there are still parts of it that I'm not sure I completely understand. And at least, according to the internet, I am not alone in that, which makes me feel a little better. I will say that it was really interesting and I enjoyed it. I just am not sure I fully understood it. So this is set in Nigeria, and we're following Caro, who is working with the government. He's a government agent, and he has this psychic ability that seems to maybe be tied to this alien biodome that's just hanging there in the air. And these mysterious deaths have started for others like him who have this special psychic ability, and he is trying to figure out what's going on before he's next. And there were just so many layers to this, and in part, I think because it's the first book in a series, it's really trying to build the world and introduce us to all of these different complex moving parts. And it was a lot. Fascinating and incredibly unique, but a little bit hard to follow at times. I also will say that I found Caro to be a very unlikable protagonist. And again, that's not necessarily a total turnoff for me. I can enjoy reading a book with an unlikable protagonist. I think he was fascinating, which is usually the thing I need. I need a character to be very interesting if they're going to be unlikable, and he was. The story was fascinating, and the alien aspect and the world building and the way the plot carries itself forward. It was really immersive and interesting, and I was super engaged, and I wanted to know what was going to happen next, and it surprised me multiple times, and just in general was a very unique and interesting experience. I will say, though, that I was somewhat confused, and on the one hand, could be user error, could be my fault. Maybe in a different format, I would have had a better time. Maybe if it wasn't in months that I was, had a lot going on in my personal life and was pretty distracted and tired, maybe I would have been able to, meet it where it was at a little bit better. So I acknowledge that it could be me, but I found it very confusing. And I think maybe a little of that could have been the author, especially because I've read other books by the author and I found them much easier to follow, even though they also were complicated and very weird. It felt like he maybe had so many ideas and so many things he wanted to establish to get the series going that he maybe sometimes rushed through the world building. There were times where things were introduced and not explained until significantly later in the book, and that is not necessarily wrong to do. I think there were just so many elements that were introduced in that way that it was really hard to follow and to stay on top of all the different moving parts and all the complicated world building and the science fiction of it all and the aliens and so on. The psychic abilities, people existing in a dream state. There was a lot going on. Okay, there was a lot going on. There was also a lot of timeline jumping, which I found a little hard to stay on top of, especially in audio. So again, some of that could have been the format and where I was at in May. But for me personally, I am giving this 3 stars right now. I probably will reread it in the future, and perhaps my rating will change, and I will of course tell you if I do, and it does, because I'm curious to read the rest of the series, but I do want to give the book another go again, probably using both my ears and my eyes at the same time to see if I can get a better handle on everything before I move forward, because I really don't want to get stuck in the weeds in the rest of the series. Such an interesting premise, though, and I would highly recommend the previous books, the horror novels. I think they were novellas that I read by the author. They were incredible. I loved them so much. I actually kind of want to reread them because it's been years and I had a really great time with them and they were very quick reads. But this one, I might need to go through this again, to be honest. If you've read this, I would love to hear your thoughts. Did you also find it confusing? Did you also struggle? Was it just me? If you want to make me feel better about my intellectual capabilities, feel free. Very interesting, though. If you're a sci-fi fan, I would recommend checking it out. I think that you will probably enjoy how unique it is and how chaotic and strange it is if you're a sci-fi reader. I think I was maybe not quite prepared. Okay, now we're getting into the 7 books I read for my 7 books in 7 days challenge. This was part of my Read It or Unhaul It challenge. I basically just wanted to do a sprint to make more progress more rapidly and just challenge myself to read a book every single day for a week and see if I could do it. So I just posted the reading vlog for this. So go check it out if you want longer reviews of all 7 of these, because I am going to probably speed through them. But it was really fun. And I would love to hear your thoughts. I would love for you to go watch that reading vlog and let me know if it's something I should do again in the future. And also, if you use either Instagram or TikTok and you're not already following me over there, that is where you could have followed along every single day for the 7 days during the challenge, which I think had its own special, unique, fun energy because of the immediacy of it all. But again, I'm going to try to quickly go through all 7 books because I feel like I've talked about them so many times since I finished them. Okay, so these are the 7 books I read for my 7 books in 7 days. All books that were on my physical TBR that I had on my shelves. And I'm not going to tell you what my prompts were to choose all of these. You can go watch the reading vlog if you want to find out. Also go watch the reading vlog if you want to find out how I chose my prompts, because I got something very exciting and fun and new and different, not just my regular spinning wheel. And I had so much fun with it. And I think you'll enjoy it too. The book I read on day 1 was Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. And this is a classic that is often taught in schools. And it is the story of our protagonist Marlowe, who is going on a journey to the Congo. And he is really confronted when he gets there, not only by the conditions that the African people are being subjected to, but also what he witnesses, especially with one particular man, Kurtz, who is experiencing this descent into the darkness of his own mind and soul. And I will just say 2 things to keep it very brief, one positive, one negative. Positive, the writing is absolutely gorgeous. It's beautiful. The writing flows like a river. There's a lot of river imagery, but also the prose is just beautiful, very poetic, and it's impressive because English was not Conrad's first language. The negative is that this book, while I think it was trying to be anti-imperialist, is quite racist. I think it is important to read classics with a critical eye, to read critically in general, and I did find that my experience was quite marred by the racism here, despite how beautifully written it was, despite how interesting it was thematically. So for me personally, this was a 3-star read. On day 2, I read We Lived on the Horizon by Erica Swyler. This is a sci-fi novel, and we're following our protagonist, who is a bioprosthetic surgeon, and she lives in this future where the city that had been on the brink of collapse had this AI, the city AI, take over to save them, and it runs the entire city. And she is one of the sainted, who are the highest class, who live a life of luxury because someone somewhere in their family did enough for the city, sacrificed enough, gave enough, contributed enough, made a discovery or something, that they have been given this role and they have all their needs met. And she lives in the house she inherited from her grandfather with a with her house AI, Nyx, who was sort of like a parent to her, a nanny to her growing up. And she's getting a little older and she realizes she doesn't have an assistant to help her with her surgery. And she's finding it harder to do it as she gets older. And she also just wants to teach someone her craft so someone else can continue to grow organs and body parts for people and replace them and help people outside of the regular medical system. So she makes a body for her house and teaches Nyx everything she knows. And this was absolutely gorgeous. It was beautiful. It was so, so, so good. If you love Becky Chambers, please read this. It is exactly those vibes. I adore Becky Chambers and I adored this. This made me cry a bunch of times. I loved our protagonist, Enita, and her relationship with her ex-common law wife. They're sort of reconnecting and they have the most adorable relationship, and I cried so many times reading their sections. I loved Enita's relationship with Nyx. They're very layered, complicated, but also very loving and endearing relationship. I loved what this book had to say about individuality versus the collective and what we give to our society, what we owe to our society. How can we exist in a society contributing as much as we can, giving as freely as we can to keep society running and to not be one of those who just takes and takes and never gives back, but also finding that line where we don't give so much of ourselves that nothing is left. It also digs into medical debt in a way that I didn't expect, that I found really moving, and I just thought this was gorgeous. It made me cry so much. I thought it was beautiful. It took me on a journey. I loved the characters. I loved the themes it was exploring, and I loved it so much. So go read it. I gave it 5 stars. And you can watch me get more emotional and rave even longer about it in the reading vlog, if you so choose. Then on day 4, I read Catalina by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio. And this is literary fiction following our protagonist, Catalina, who is an undocumented immigrant to the United States from Ecuador. And she's living with her grandparents, who are also undocumented immigrants from Ecuador. And she is attending Harvard on scholarship. And this is very much a character study. It's quite low on plot, definitely sad, smart girl lit, examining objectification and exoticization and the experience of being an undocumented immigrant, but also very much about Catalina specifically and her struggles with figuring out where she belongs and who she is and what she wants out of life. And I don't want to say too much because, again, it's pretty low on plot and I don't want to spoil anything for you. It's also quite short, but I really loved this. I had a great time with it and I give it 5 stars. Then I read another classic by Swedish author and poet Karin Boye, Kallocain, and this is a book that should be considered within the canon of classic dystopian fiction, along with Brave New World in 1984. It was published prior to 1984, and Karin Boye was not only a female author, but she was also queer. And as I pointed out in my reading vlog, I just think it's interesting that we have a canon of dystopian classics with lots of men, and yet the queer female author in translation is nowhere to be found on pretty much any recommendation list I've ever seen for dystopian classic fiction. I didn't even hear about this book within that context, which is wild. But this is fantastic. It definitely belongs in the canon. It is so worthy of a read if you enjoy dystopian fiction. If you liked 1984 Brave New World, please read Kallocain. This is a book where our protagonist is a scientist and he's developing a truth serum so that not only will the world state be in your homes, aware of everything you do and everywhere you go, but they will now be aware of every thought you have. And that's all I will say to intrigue you. You can really tell that Karin Boye was a poet. She uses her ability to write in that lyrical, poetic style very sparingly. And then when she lets it out, it just smacks you in the face. This is quite a short read, but it was very affecting. Absolutely fascinating, and I would highly, highly, highly recommend 5 stars for Kallocain. Then I read Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. This is technically considered a horror novel. I would not sell it to you as a horror novel because I think that would probably set you up for disappointment, especially if you are a regular horror reader. I would say this reads much more like contemporary fiction exploring grief, which I very much needed in May, and I was very emotionally invested in this, and I cried many, 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 many times reading this. And I also cried in my review. I tried not to, but I couldn't help myself. I thought this was absolutely beautiful. I loved the characters. I loved the setting. It is set in Canada and for the most part takes place in the prairies, and I live in the prairies, and it just felt so much like home. It was so familiar to me. I also think the way that this book explores grief is so affecting and so relatable and so painful, but also healing and beautiful. There are so many quotes in here that I will come back to many, many times, I know. And there is a bit of a horror element. There's a bit of our protagonist is having these really kind of terrifying dreams, and they seem to be crossing into reality, and she's not quite sure what's going on. And there is a little bit of body horror and the like, but I would not read this expecting it to be horror in the strictest sense of the word. But I do think this is absolutely beautiful and so worth a read, and just very emotionally resonant and gorgeous. And I loved it so much. I'm gonna cry again. I'm not crying again. I gave this 5 stars. Please read Bad Cree by Jessica Johns. It is beautiful. It's so beautiful. Okay. Oh my God. All right. Then on day 6, I read You Weren't Meant to Be Human by Andrew Joseph White. Now, this one is horror. This is 100% horror. Please don't read this if you don't normally read horror. Actually, probably be careful even if you do normally read horror. This is a lot. This is very extreme and graphic, and it's a very hard read. It is a very harrowing and upsetting and devastating read. I thought it was very well done for the most part. And I would recommend it to those who go into it with their eyes open and feel prepared for it. In this novel, we are following Crane, who is a trans man, very young trans man, and he has been basically pulled into the cult of a hive mind of unknown origins that seems to be a collective consciousness made up of worms and flies, and it requires flesh to feed on. And he has joined this cult, and he has a boyfriend who is also in the cult who is quite abusive, and they have a very toxic dynamic. And Crane, in part, has joined because this is the first time that he felt seen and felt able to be himself and to transition and was accepted as himself. And then Crane gets pregnant, and the hive demands that he carry to term and have the baby because they want it. And the book is following Crane through his pregnancy, and it's in parts based on his trimesters. And this book is very much about the horror, not only of an unwanted pregnancy, which is bad enough, but the gender dysphoria all tied up into that of Crane being forced to be pregnant as a trans man who never wanted that experience, and who he feels his body changing through the entire novel and is feeling the increasing gender dysphoria and feeling betrayed not only by what he thought was his home and his family and the first people to accept him for who he was. He feels like they're betraying him, but also he feels like he's being betrayed by his own body. And the way that this handled the horror of the pregnancy and Crane's experience as a trans man and his gender dysphoria, I think was so incredibly well done. If that had been the entire novel, it would have been 5 stars easily. It was so devastating to read, but incredibly, incredibly visceral and felt very emotionally honest, especially on the part of Andrew Joseph White. I think he put so much of himself into this, and you can really tell. That being said, I think the hive part of it was completely unnecessary. I think the hive actually kind of took away from everything else. When the hive showed up, I was just kind of waiting for it to go away again because it just was not resonating the same way. I think that this book had so much horror already in the realistic elements that it didn't need that part. And I think the hive was a little underdeveloped, honestly. I just think it didn't need to be there. And I also had a few qualms with the ending. I don't dislike the ending by any means, and I go into more detail in the reading vlog, but I just had some questions about the way it played out and if it was really totally entirely necessary. But all that being said, I think overall this was really, really fantastically done. I felt my heart drop into my stomach from basically the first page, and it just was stuck there the whole time. It was so harrowing and devastating, and I was so emotionally attached to Crane, and I just wanted him to get out and to be okay, and I was just terrified for him and so horrified by everything that he was going through. And I just think it was very well done in those aspects, and I give it 4 stars. Again, I'm not sure who I would recommend this to because I think a lot of people would really struggle with it. And I struggled with it despite reading a lot of horror. So just keep that in mind. But I think if this is the book for you, it will really be the book for you. And hopefully my review here or my longer review in the reading vlog will be enough for you to figure out if it is for you. Then the final book I read for my 7 books in 7 days was Stoneblind by Natalie Haynes. This is a retelling of Medusa's story. It's kind of a blending of the Greek and Roman myths of Medusa, and it's meant to be a feminist retelling. And personally for me, it failed in being feminist, and also kind of failed in being Medusa's story, because to be totally honest, this felt like Athena and Perseus' story, and Medusa was a side character. I also really didn't expect this to be as comedic as it was, and I felt a lot of tonal whiplash going between almost slapstick comedy to very serious, somber moments and back again. This just didn't work for me. It was not what I expected and also not what I wanted. And I think it's fine for what it is, but I also think it's very mismarketed. I think the blurb and the title and the cover are very misleading for what this book is actually about and who this book focuses on. And it didn't land for me as a feminist retelling, personally. Check out the reading vlog for more detail. I don't want to go on a long rant again because I kept getting sidetracked and ranting more in the other video, and I don't want to do that again. So personally for me, this is not what I wanted, and it wasn't really to my taste. So I gave Stoneblind 2 stars. Next up, I read 2 more books for my Reading Around the World challenge that are both in my last Reading Around the World vlog. The first was By Night the Mountain Burns by Juan Tomás Avila Laurel. And this one was very short and also not really a traditional novel. It's told in a very stream of consciousness sort of style. And I found it interesting, but I also think I wanted more out of it in terms of a narrative or character development or thematic content. So for me, this was just sort of a middle of the road read at 3 stars. And then I read Eve de ses décombres, or Eve Out of Her Ruins by Ananda Devi, and I loved this book. It was heartbreaking and devastating and gorgeous. I thought the characterization was impeccable. I was so immersed from beginning to end. The prose was gorgeous. It broke my heart into 5 billion pieces, and I don't think I could ever read it again, but I adored it, and I would highly recommend it as long as you were emotionally prepared. And I gave it 5 stars. Check out that reading vlog for more detailed reviews of my Reading Around the World picks. Okay, and we are almost to the end. I have 2 more reads for May. These were 2 personal picks. I got them on audio just for my own enjoyment. The first was a horror read, House of Margins by Tlotlo Samase. And this one is a very weird sort of speculative horror. And basically in this novel, we're following a woman who has gone missing at a writing retreat. It's this prestigious retreat trying to find African authors, and the winner gets a cash prize and gets mentoring and connections in the publishing industry. And this woman is chosen as one of the finalists and goes to this house for this retreat, and she ends up going missing. And the book starts with the sister of the missing woman finding a phone with a podcast on it, and one of the other authors from the retreat is telling the story and sharing what happened and sort of profiting off of her sister's disappearance by creating a podcast and merch and a Patreon and so on for this true crime story. And as it goes on, we spend more and more time within the podcast in the past seeing what happened, and things are very strange and mind-bending and speculative, and things just get stranger and stranger as the book goes on. And I think there are a few things. I don't typically love incorporating podcasts into books in general. I tend to find it a bit gimmicky. I don't necessarily hate it. I often don't feel it adds that much. And in this case, I kind of felt like I would have rather just follow her story going through the writing retreat without the podcast framework. It started to feel a little repetitive as time went on, and I don't, again, it's fine. It wasn't terrible. And it definitely added an extra layer of commentary with this other writer profiting off of the tragedy and profiting off of a story that was not her own. So it added extra layers thematically. I just am maybe personally not the biggest fan of podcasts being incorporated into books. This was another one, kind of like Rosewater, that I found a bit harder to follow. I found the beginning of this one particularly confusing, and I actually restarted it. And from there, it was a little bit easier, but I did find it hard to know what was really happening and what wasn't. That was likely intentional, but it did make it harder to follow as a reader, I would say. I did find it really interesting and very eerie and spooky. I found the way that it progressed was quite surprising, and it was gripping all the way through. I was very immersed and engaged in it, even when I was confused. I do think the ending, some of the things that happened in the end, and some, there were some choices that were made by our protagonist, I'll put it that way, to be non-spoilery, that I can understand why it went the way it did, and I don't hate it going that way. I just think it probably would have been more interesting for me personally if it had gone the other way. And I think that's all I can say without spoilers. Again, I don't hate the ending. It was totally fine. I just kind of was hoping for it to go down path B, and instead it went down path A, and that is okay. I just thought it would have been more interesting and fun if it had gone down path B. But I'm not the author, so I don't get to decide. I think there are a couple little plot holes in how this plays out, but I do think the haunted house quality of it and all of the surreal, terrifying imagery was really well done. And again, super immersive. I think for me, I'm honestly still kind of on the fence. I'm landing somewhere between 3 and 4 stars. I think, honestly, I'm still a little on the fence with my rating. I'm landing somewhere between 3 to 4 stars. I thought this was quite enjoyable, and I would definitely recommend if you like strange, surreal horror, especially haunted house horror that takes a very odd, unusual turn. I'm going to give it 3 stars for now, but I might change my mind. I might give it 4 in the future. Yeah. That's where I'm at. Okay. And then my last book in May and the last book in this video, unfortunately, we're ending on a bit of a sour note because this is my only other 1-star read. Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessl. And I picked this up kind of on a whim. I saw it recommended and it sounded kind of interesting, like a murder mystery that's a bit of a time loop thing. Sounded kind of fun. Unfortunately, the very best thing about this is the premise, the idea that these former friends are brought together and they're stuck in a time loop and they're trying to solve a murder. That is, the premise is the best part. I thought the execution of this was so poor and I had a very bad time. I honestly kept listening mostly because I was shocked by how poorly executed it was, and I was kind of waiting for things to get better somehow or just to crash and burn. I don't know what I was hoping for, but it did not deliver. This was rough, okay? I think for me, I found the writing style very much not to my taste. I thought it was quite poorly written, personally. I thought it was very repetitive. I felt it very much did not utilize any of the potential it had in this very cool, interesting premise. It was supposed to be possibly thousands and thousands of loops, and it just felt like it had been 2 weeks. Like there was no sense of time, there was no sense of the horror and the slow degradation or the loss of humanity from being trapped forever in this never-ending loop. I felt like the murder mystery was very predictable. The result was exactly what I expected from very early on, and I was never once shocked by any of the reveals. They all were very clearly coming, which was disappointing. This very much felt like word salad. The prose just was very much not to my taste. I hated the writing style so much. I also feel like this author maybe has like a personal vendetta against Lin-Manuel Miranda because it felt like the murder victim was basically supposed to be Lin-Manuel Miranda. I will not be elaborating further. And she really seemed to hate him. And that was interesting. I know there are people who are not fans of Miranda out there in the world, sure, but the level of hatred that this author seems to have for him just feels unearned. What has Lin-Manuel Miranda done to you? It was very strange. There are so many shoehorned in similes and metaphors, and they are all so awkward. There was so much telling and so little showing. And oh yeah, I forgot. The second note I made in my Notion reading tracker while I was reading was literally a budget secret history. Yeah, I stand by it. So that was Neverworld Wake, not for me whatsoever. I had a very bad time. It was such a waste of a very interesting premise. No, I would not recommend. I had a very bad time. 1 star from me. What a silly, silly book that was. And that brings us to the end. Those are all the books I read in April and May of this year. I hope you enjoyed this wrap up. Don't forget to check out all the reading vlogs for longer, more detailed reviews and for almost all of these spoiler sections that you can skip over if you need to, or you can watch if you've read them and you want to hear all my spoilery thoughts. Share your thoughts down below if you've read any of these books. I would love to chat more with you about them. And if you have recommendations for me based on any of these books, if you have a book in mind that you think I would love, please let me know. I'm always looking for more. And if you made it all the way to the end, leave an emoji down below representing one of the books I talked about in this video. And I'm going to try to guess which book your emoji represents. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you so much. Thank you again to Suri for partnering with me on this video. Don't forget to click the link in my description or scan the QR code on screen and use my code PLANT15 for an extra 15% off Suri. And with that, I'm going to get going. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you really soon in my next one. Bye, friends.